Hi everyone, welcome to Relationship Essentials. We're excited to bring you guys another episode, and we are excited to have some audience. Can we hear from the audience? All right, okay, all right. Anyways, Relationship Essentials is a platform, a Christian platform that we started to push kingdom way of doing relationship. So our heart behind Relationship Essentials is that we believe the culture's way of doing relationship have led us down the wrong path, and it's time that we repent, change our minds, and get on the right path. If you're not following us right now, please make sure you follow us. We are on YouTube, Relationship Essentials. Subscribe, share with your friends, repost. And if you're on Instagram or any social media platform, you can also follow us on social media platforms. We are Relationship Essentials. And also, if you want to help push kingdom on a daily basis, we have merch. We have t-shirts, we have hats, we have hoodies. So please make sure you support the brand by buying one of the items, and just every time you wear it, you are reminding people that doing it God's way is better. All right. So we want to use every aspect of our lives to push kingdom. Right. So today I'm excited about the topic today because I've known our guest for a long time. And what is funny is she's one of the people that was here from the first time we started Relationship Essentials. And she's been a guest here so many times. But I'm more excited today to have her on this episode because she just wrote a new book. She wrote a new book. Can we clap it up for her, guys? She wrote a new book. It's called Heartbreak Hotel. It's time to check out. All right. Anybody ever been through a heartbreak? I know the guys are not going to raise their hands, but it's all good. But I'm so excited to hear what she has to say on the topic of heartbreak. So the first episode we're going to do today is dealing with or healing from heartbreak. And this is now her first book. So she wrote another book. I believe, what is the other one called?
This is not your typical Finding Your Purpose book.
This is not your typical Finding Your Purpose book. And I know it was the last time we talked about that book, it was also because of you went through a breakup and you were able to find your purpose through your pain. And you were encouraging people to search deeper through whatever it is that they're going through and see purpose behind it. So I'm so excited. She does so much. I follow her on Instagram. I'm always seeing her empowering people, teaching people, coaching people. And when someone devotes their life to serving other people, it is so admirable because they say life is not measured by how long you live, but how well you live. You know, and she spends her life pouring into other people. So I'm excited for her to pour into us today. So let's just give her one more round of applause. Miss Joy, all right? Miss Joy. All right, so you wrote the first book. What inspired this book, Heartbreak Hotel?
So it's funny because I want to say last month I posted something on Instagram. So I posted something that in 2015 was when I experienced a breakup. And I remember at that time, like I was journaling, but at that moment I was venting, right? So I was writing all these things. And it's funny because I titled it Heartbreak Hotel, It's Time to Check Out. Because in that moment I was like, oh no, all that I went through, I'm finna write this as a book one day. And then I stopped because I was like, okay, now I'm just putting my business out there. And it was not intentional. It was just me venting. And I also knew in the area of dating, I was a hot mess. So I was like, you know what? Let me close this journal. I'm going to let life. And then I was outside doing what I want. And I was, yeah. And you know the thing with me, I'm very transparent and vulnerable, right? Because I think people create this image, especially with Christianity, that everything is so perfect, that everyone has always gotten it right. And for me, that was far from the case. So when I was outside and I was like, you know what? This is not for me. And it got to that point where I was like, you know what? There are certain types of convictions I acquired in that journey. There were certain types of standards that I had to like really become more stern in. And at that moment, I was like, you know what, God, this is the time. And from 2015 up until what I was writing this book, maybe 2 years ago. So that was a long time. And so sometimes people feel like, oh, you have to write something right away. But in the moment, it's like while you're healing, like your book is actually being written when you're going through the journey and you're learning and you're attaining all the wisdom and gems. So it started in 2015, but it was published this year.
Wow. So that's 8 years. That's beautiful. I like that. One question I have for you is, as a Christian, I've learned that God is in the business of redeeming our stories, right? So it's not my story, it's God's story. It's not your story, it's God's story. God wants to take whatever it is that we're going through to inspire the next person, to inspire the next generation. But people naturally don't want to share their shortcomings. People naturally don't want to share their weakness. We like to look good, in front of people. We are so worried about how we are being perceived from the outside world. How did you find the courage to be able to share some of what some people would consider as, weakness or shameful, or you don't have a game, or whatever it is that goes? Did you have a moment where you were reluctant to share your story, and how did you overcome that moment?
Yeah, all the time. I feel like when I started, when you give God your yes, people like to say it and like, yes, God, I'm giving you my yes. I'm going to say yes to your will. Do you know what you're really saying yes to? Like, that means you're going to be unapologetic. You are going to be bold and confident in whatever it is you are pouring into people and sharing. And so I think even from that moment, from when I wrote the first book, and I had to be like, all right, y'all, like, this is what I've been through, right? And I think in that moment, there was a lot of shame, guilt, and then, I have Nigerian parents, so it's like, oh Lord, this is published, so I'm gonna have aunties and uncles, everyone back home in Nigeria is gonna be reading a little bit about my business. But one thing I realized is that, that was my past. And one of the things I wrote in the first book was everything you're going through is somebody else's how-to book anyways. Everybody wants growth and everyone wants to be inspired. But the thing is, like, who's going to be the one to do it? And so I realized in that moment where I was like, yo, I don't even care what y'all say. Because when you think about it, the people who have the most to say do the least anyways. So the people who have the most to say do the least anyway. So I realized that the people who were talking, it was never the people who was walking in the purpose, because the people who walked in the purpose will look at me and be like, sis, I got you, I understand, I get it. Oh, I'm gonna pray for you, I'm gonna pray with you. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna support you, I'm going to encourage you. It was the ones that was not doing anything were the ones who had the absolute most to say. And in that moment I was like, I don't care. Like, you get to that point in your journey where you're like, I don't care if you like me or not. I don't care if you agree with me or not. But once you give God your yes, there are certain things that God is going to tell you to say that it's not going to make sense. It's not going to be popular. But however, it's going to be that one person in the corner that's like, oh my gosh, sis, thank you. I've been praying for this confirmation, and you were the confirmation, right? Again, the glory isn't to me. The glory is to God. And so once you begin to realize and understand purpose of what it really means to be purpose driven, you'll be more open to walking in that. And I think sometimes, and I blame social media, people glamorize being purpose driven. They make it seem as if it's a walk in the park. You're, doing all of these big glamorous things, but in reality, it's hard. Like, you are going to lose people along the way. You are going to be talked about. But in reality, there is this sense of joy and fulfillment that I have when I'm able to share my story from the most realistic lens, because a majority of half of the mistakes I made was because I was in spaces and rooms where nobody wanted to keep it real. And a lot of the times and we see this with young people now, they are doing the things that they're doing because nobody's keeping it real. Half of my dating mistakes and the toxicity that I allowed, and even the moments that I was toxic, was because in a Nigerian home, nobody tells you about dating. You're supposed to get your bachelor, you're supposed to get your master's. You pray for your husband, he just shows up, right? Or if you go to church and hey, Joy, I want you to meet so and so. I want you guys to get to know each other, and it's boom, it's supposed to happen. But nobody tells you about the in between mark. So I think in that moment, I'm like, I don't want anyone to have to deal with the same things that I went through.
That is beautiful. That's beautiful. One thing that you said that I think that I want people to remember is, I heard a long time ago, and it goes like this: it says, God seldom uses people that are concerned about other people's opinion. If you are going to be an instrument in the hands of God, you cannot be too concerned about how other people, because if you're looking for the approval of people, then you will die by their rejection. right? So I love that you shared that. And just, it takes courage to overcome that urge to not share your struggles. All right, you mentioned something, and it's rare that people say, "Hey, I'm toxic," right? Everybody always thinks is their partner or their ex that was toxic, right? So what I want you to share, especially being that you wrote a book on dealing with heartbreak, and I think sometimes life is like Steve Jobs said in his speech. He said, "You live life forward, but you understand it backwards." Right? When we look back at life, we have a 2020 vision, hindsight. What are some ways that you dealt with heartbreak that in the moment you were convinced this is how you deal with heartbreak, but now that you've matured, you're like, man, that was toxic as hell.
Well, full transparency. So I think being outside was what I felt like. You know,
Can you tell us? Yeah,
being outside. I was just, dating. I was dating pointlessly. I didn't have.
Like, okay, I want to understand.
Dating.
Okay, let me break it. Let me draw it out, right? When you say dating,
going out one day,
free dinner.
Yeah, it was free dinner.
Okay.
Yeah, brunch.
Okay, girls that
and mind you, it was brunch when this was prior to brunch being popular, and with all this took place years ago. Mm-hmm. So I'm 35 now.
She's transformed.
Right, a lot has happened. So this was probably around my late 20s. Mm-hmm. This took place. So it was just like, yeah, you just go on dates when you knew you had no business going on dates, right? Like, I didn't know who I was at that moment. I would say another one was not even admitting that, oh my gosh, I'm hurt. Like, I think sometimes we don't allow ourselves to feel, and we numb ourselves. And I get it. Like, we're supposed to maximize our singleness, but it requires you to heal first. And I didn't take the time to actually do that. And I like, even looking back, I'm like, yeah, no. And then also another one was, there were moments, and when I tell people this, they're like, okay, Joy, how long have you been single? So I've been in situationships, and we know that. I feel like we're in 2023. We shouldn't even be talking about situationships anymore, because we should all know better. But that was something that was my identity. So that, my singleness has been a little over 8 years without a committed relationship. And what I did wrong back then was the ones that came to me that was like, hey, I want something serious. I'm ready for commitment. I was so emotionally unavailable that I found every excuse in the book to be like, no. And that's why I can boldly admit and say, like, there was a time when I was toxic. I think sometimes women, we always blame the men, but at what point do we sit and be like, is it the men or is it the ones that I'm choosing? Right? Or, and because again, like, we all have this image of pretty much of when it comes into social media, and we posted, everyone wants the man in the suit and all this stuff. But what about the man in the hoodie? He can actually be the very thing that you're praying for, the very thing that you want and you need. And I'm not gonna lie, I pushed those guys away, right? And so looking back, I'm like, Jesus, here I am praying to you now. God, send me my husband. And God's like, serious back then, but it's a good thing because I would have messed it up anyways. And I didn't even realize and acknowledge even back then was like, I'm not as ready as I thought I was. So I think in that moment, it's like you have to put a mirror in front of you and get real with yourself. And right in the beginning, I didn't go to therapy. And if you know me, you follow me on social media, like, you'll see on my stories, I believe in therapy. I think therapy is important. I think you can still be a Christian and go to therapy, right? And I think one of those things where it's like you have to unpack, why do you make the decisions that you make? Why do you have the standards that you have? Why do you respond the way that you respond? And I think in that moment, I was like, yeah. And I think that's why I wrote this book also, was because this is a book that I felt like if I had read this book once I dealt with the breakup back in like 2015, I wouldn't have done half the stuff I did.
Something that you said that I kind of want you to shed a little bit more light on is sometimes we don't know that we are not healed. I think I read a book a long time ago, and one of the things that he said was that we are all broken, right? Sometimes our brokenness doesn't necessarily come from a romantic relationship. Sometimes our brokenness comes from the lack of a father in the home, or sometimes our brokenness comes from the lack of a mother in the home, or sometimes our brokenness comes from a sibling rivalry. Like, if you begin to unpack how we can all be broken, it's like many people think, man, I'm not dealing with no pain because I haven't been heartbroken, or I haven't been, no girl has left me, or no girl have ever cheated on me, or no guy has left me. I have been the one living. I have been the one living the relationship. So I think if you don't see a problem, you don't feel the drive to fix something that you don't even acknowledge exists. So you talked about there were seasons in your life where you felt like you didn't even know that you needed to heal. And I feel like it's not knowing that you need to heal will lead you to get into a relationship broken, and it will eventually lead to heartbreak, because when you're broken, you will bleed on the person that God sends you, right? So like you said, we might not think we need healing, but then we are breaking every relationship we're getting into because we're just trying to fill a void, or we're making someone responsible for something that we should have been responsible for. So what are some ways that someone in the room, someone that's listening what are some of I call it like the indicators. What are some of those indicators that, all right, if this is happening, maybe you need to heal? Or what are some of the things to look out for someone that, might not know they need to heal?
I think one, if you're emotionally unavailable, right? Like I think sometimes people say, oh, I'm ready for a relationship. And then you're getting to know someone consistently. I don't believe you need to be dating someone for years before being in a relationship. I don't even know where that came from. I just feel like within Black community, all this toxic love, like what? Sorry, as I digress, because I feel like because when you look at other races, when they like somebody, I like you and you like me. You get to know each other, and bam, why would I have you on these streets walking single? So for me, I think like if you're emotionally unavailable, what that would look like is if you're like talking to someone for a long time, longer than you need to, and you're monogamously talking to them, I feel like, at times you got to ask yourself, am I ready? Or am I afraid of a commitment? And it's okay to be afraid in the moment, but it is not okay for you to drag someone down a path of gaslighting them and making it seem as if, oh, you're doing the most. I'm getting there. So I think like when you're not emotionally available, and I think if somebody has hurt you in the past, if you see them right now, if they walk into this room, how are you going to respond and how are you going to feel? I feel like if you have residue of, of being angry, right? And I think people think with forgiveness means you have to be their friend. It does not mean that. It means that you have let this person go. There have been people from my past that I have walked by or that I see and I acknowledge and I'm like, oh, hey, how you doing? Da, da, da. Right? And I think sometimes people say, oh, I let the past be the past. But when the past is in front of you, how are you responding? And a lot of the times it doesn't have to be with you saying something nasty to the person, but it can be your thoughts. It can be your heart posture. And then I also think even when and let's keep it real, if you're having excessive sex with people that you don't know, that is a clear indicator. And I don't know when culture made it seem it's okay. I really don't feel like a God had even created us to just allow anybody to just come into our physical body. And I remember my therapist was telling me this. She was like, because we're talking about like the dating culture, and I lived in Jersey for 9 years and now I'm in Brooklyn. And I was like, girl, these dating streets are very interesting. And she was like, yeah, New York has like a very hookup culture. And she told me something that I found to be very profound, and I mentioned it in the book. And she was saying, how can people be so okay with laying on their backs with someone where if you ask them about their DNA, you don't know it. When you ask them about their family medical history, you don't know it. If you ask them about the most intimate things that you should know, they don't know it. And so she was like, we are blindly trusting people. And in that moment, I was like, wow, I wish you told me this like 6 years ago. But it was one of those things where I'm like, that's very interesting. And not to put the thing on men, but I think for some men, and this is what I've heard from male therapists, where they will say that when you try to create this roster of women you are having sex with just like you're doing it for fun, you're trying to fill a void. And a lot of the times it's when you call it out is when they get triggered the most. So if I'm like, hey, you're having a lot of sex with all these strangers. What's hurting you? And you get instantly mad. Yeah, you need to stop and heal, because everything comes from a place, and people get so focused on the surface. But when you take it down, you get to the roots. That's when I think things get real. Even with like excessive drinking and smoking and all those things to numb you. And there's nothing wrong with having like wine, because I do drink wine, you know. So if you see me somewhere and have a wine or a mimosa, don't judge me. But what I will say is, like, if you're, and mind you, these are things I never thought about. So now I'm looking back at like some of the guys is like I would go out with, and they was just like chugging it, and I'm like, you're filling a void. And like a very healthy person would want to be present. You wouldn't want to not be present. And for me personally, I want to be present 24/7, 7 days a week. I need to know what's happening. And it's taken me a long time to get to that place. But I think that personally, those are some of the signs.
I want to add to I want to get back to eventually the time aspect of things. But one thing I want to add to that, I think, if let's say you're in the room and you don't feel like you need healing, one indicator that I think is this: if you've become hopeless when it comes to finding a partner, you need to heal. And the reason why I say that is also this: like, it goes for both men and women, but especially on the women's side. Most of you probably agree with me. I don't know if you agree with me, but you will hear women say things like, "Yeah, I don't think there are good men out there," or "I don't think a man could be faithful," or I don't think a successful man can be faithful." I think if you get to a point in your life where you don't think there's good out there, you get to a place of hopelessness, I think there's something that needs to heal on the inside of you that will change your perspective and give you a different lens for you to see the world differently. What do you have to say to that? Because I've heard a lot of women say things like, hold on, let me share this story real quick, right? I remember there's a young lady that I know from college, and I remember running into her. It's been a while that I've seen her. And I'm like, "Hey, man, it's a long time I've seen you. Like, what up? What's up?" Like, I knew she was dating some guy. I'm like, "Oh, like, how is it going with him?" And she said, "Oh, we're still together." But I saw her with someone else, right? But that's why I'm like, I used to dating the other guy. But she said that they got to a point in their relationship, and he asked her for them to be in an open relationship. And I asked her, I'm like, "But is that what you wanted? Was an open relationship something that you've wanted?" She said, "No, but I think I have just come to face the reality." I'm like, "What is the reality?" And she said, "Most men are going to cheat anyway and act like they didn't cheat. So I might as well give him the permission to cheat and tell me not to cheat, to go out there, and as long as he's honest about it." And for me, all I saw is someone that, number one, it comes from a place of broken self-image, because you have to see yourself less than to accept less than, right? So, and that's why I say, if you get to a place in your life where you don't think there's a good woman out there, I've had some male friends tell me, "This woman out here are savages," right? And they don't think a woman, I'm being serious. I've had friends tell me that they don't think a woman could be faithful. So, it's like, I don't know if I should pick. So I might as well just, be a free agent as opposed to commit and get hurt, So what is your take on that hopelessness part?
So I'm going to definitely be biased. I do think for some men, when they say there are no good women out there, I think sometimes they're thinking about the Instagram model.
Okay.
I think that's also a thing too, because I think, and we have to remember, our standards, historically are going to be rooted in white supremacy. On the more the white the features, the more appealing and appeasing it is, which is why sometimes men go for, not all men, but sometimes some people go for with women that look more exotic, right? But that's a whole nother story.
That's a whole
conversation for a whole nother day. But what I will say is, when someone has a situation where they just kind of feel like there's no one out there, I wouldn't even say it's just not healing. I think it's just residue of pain. Because sometimes, like, I think feeling hopeless, it's okay to have those feelings. It's not okay to stay there. Because when you think about the enemy, he's strategic. So the first thing he's coming after is your mind, right? And so when you have certain thoughts, it's going to naturally order your steps on how you go. And I always tell women, like, if you feel like this, then you have to take a moment to stop. Or people, who are you going after? Who are you giving a chance? It may not be any good people out there that is your type. Right. And I think sometimes when people say there's no good men out there, there's no good women out there, there is no good people that is your type out there. And until you challenge the person to date outside of their type and to give somebody a chance and even to check their own preferences, it of course is going to be difficult. And one of my really good friends, she told me this. She was like, Joy, how far has your type gotten you? And I remember she asked me that, and I couldn't say anything. I was like, not far. So I think it gets to the point where you have to be very open and start to really think about what is it that you actually need, because looks will change, your body will change. I don't care how fit you are. You don't know but marriage is different than a relationship. So I think people forget about covenant, and covenant means no matter what, I'm sticking beside you. If you're in the hospital, I'm sticking beside you. If you lose your leg, I'm sticking beside you. I think we get so caught up on the social media photos and videos of weddings that when we talk about marriage and choosing your spouse, we don't talk about the covenant part. And that's why I think some people and some men, because men should be taking the lead. When you ask men, ask them a question regarding just what should you look for in a wife, how many men can answer that? They're not taught how to find and discern a wife, right? It's just all image, the vibe, the feeling, and da-da-da-da-da, which is why they end up cheating all the time anyways. Marriage does not heal lust.
We cheat though.
And yes, and the same thing, I think honestly,
I heard the statistics now is women and men cheat about the same rate.
Yeah, I mean this generation.
I'm just going over the stats.
And it's probably real. I think honestly,
women are just better at hiding it.
Yeah, that's probably true.
A woman could be sleeping with your best friend and kiss two of you at the same time. But a guy is he can't hide it because he wants to brag, so he ends up exposing himself. I want to touch on one thing that you said. Look, we could talk about healing and heartbreak and checking. I actually like the title of the book, Heartbreak Hotel. It's time to check out. But I think there's nothing wrong with going through pain. We all have times in our lives where we go through seasons where we need to overcome, or we need to push through. And I remember listening to Joyce Meyer a long time ago, and she would say things like, it's okay to feel like that, but don't stay there, right? Treat it like a hotel. You check in and you check out. Don't make that your permanent residence, and that's something that's why I really, really love the title of the book. But one of the things that you said is, how do you know you need healing? And I think this is so important because so the word responsibility, right? Responsibility comes, I remember reading the book, The Man's Search for Meaning. And in the book, he said the word responsibility comes from two words, response and ability. And he says between stimulus and response, there is a gap, there's a space where we get to choose our response. That's where we have the ability to choose our response. So when someone says take responsibility, they are not saying what happened to you is your fault. What they are saying is that you have the ability to choose how you respond to this thing that has happened to you. So maybe the heartbreak wasn't your fault, but it's still your responsibility to respond appropriately to this heartbreak. Or if someone cheated on you, it's not your fault, but you still have the ability to choose your response. And when I say that what I'm alluding to is this, that if you don't respect yourself, it's hard for you to demand respect from other people. And a lot of times that's it is with women, right? If you let a man date you for 6 years, it's a reflection of the respect that you have for your time. So I'm not sure if you guys have watched the episode I did with Ezekiel, one of the things that I shared was I said one of the negatives of doing relationship the culture's way is that it wastes time. You're wasting time. And the reason why you waste time is because you are not cognizant of the fact that you are on earth on a borrowed time. And that your life, if I tell people, especially men, I tell men, the lifespan of man is about, the Bible says it's 70. So the average man lives about 70 to 80 years. If you're 30 as a man, you have about 50 left, maybe 40. And it's such a hard thing to think about. But when you start looking at life as time, that's what you call it, your lifetime. Your time is your currency. If you let someone disrespect you by keeping you stagnant for 6 years, it's not their fault. You just don't know your value. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about one of the ways that one of the ways to tell them, maybe, hey, I need to heal from something because I don't see myself properly. And because the law of perspective is the way I see it determine what I do. Right? So if I don't see myself properly, I would tolerate him telling me, all right, we've been talking for 2 years. We've been dating for 4 years. We've been engaged for 3 years, right? So we tolerate things based on the perception that we have of us. So like one of the popular stories in the scriptures is the story of the Israelites before they were sent to conquer the land of Canaan. Joshua sent 2 spies, right? And 12 spies. 10 went, 10 came back and said, hey, we are like grasshoppers in their eyes. And 2 came back and said, we're able. And the story goes like this. God allowed them to die where they saw themselves. God will let you stay where you see yourself. If you see yourself as a grasshopper, God will not going to be like, man, I want to ginger him to be a giant. The way we see ourselves is the way that God will allow us to stay there. So if you see yourself as worthless or you don't respect your time, you're going to allow other people to disrespect your time. And I think even that for men, I always say this. It's going to sound crazy, but I still stand by it. I don't believe in chasing a woman. I believe in you can initiate, you can make effort, but if there's no reciprocity, I don't think it is respectful of your self-image as a man to keep chasing a woman that don't want you. Because you understand, it's my time. If you're not interested in me, that's fine. I'm not going to waste my time trying to convince you to see my value. The right person for me will see my value when they meet me. And I think vice versa. So I think when it comes to time, I think for us, we have to start looking at how much we are letting people waste our time. If you let people waste your time in life, you don't respect yourself. Right? So talk to us on, so now we know we need to heal. We are broken. Everybody here probably have dealt with some kind of heartbreak, whether it's a business relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship. But because it's relationship essentials, we're going to talk about the romantic part. What are some of the healthy ways to heal?
Therapy is important because you have that moment where you get to the root, and it's a continuous thing, right? It's not like, okay, you meet someone, you like them, you're like, all right, therapist, this is the last session. No, continue, because you want to have your space where you're able to like process like all of your experiences. Another thing, and this is actually the most important, I think a lot of the times people run away from God and they explore other things. Don't be those people. I think one of the things that in the word it says that God is near and dear to the brokenhearted, right? And a lot of the times it may seem and feel good because like there's scripture that talks about like just what the ways might seem good, but the end leads to destruction. And I remember when I dealt with that breakup with the guy, and mind you, I lived in Connecticut. I moved from Connecticut to New Jersey to be closer to him. We didn't live together, but I moved in. At that time I was like 24. So I was just like, who cares? I'm finishing up my master's degree. YOLO. I mean, I'm not living with him. So even if it don't work out, hey, why not? And he brought me to it was my former church home in New Jersey. And I, at that time, was like a member. At that time, I was like a Sunday school teacher. I was also doing our announcements in church. So just imagine dealing with the breakup. And at this rate, I was like, and maybe at that time it was the pride in me. I said, I'm not letting this person push me out of this church. I actually like this church, so I'm going to keep coming. So I kept going. And I remember one time I was doing the announcement. So imagine my church was big, doing the announcement, welcoming all our first time guests, smiling, making people feel warm and welcome. And you see him with his girlfriend, right? And then you run into them. Like I would go to places and see him, then that became his fiance. I'm just like, God, Lord, all right, welcome to Agape Family Worship Center. Still having to do that. But you know one thing, looking back, I'm happy because when you asked me the question, how are you able to share your experience without being shamed and guilt? I didn't allow my emotions to move me, right? Because you realize like it's temporary. And also it forced me to bring everything to God. And people ask like, oh, how did you start, the book or the coaching? I started blogging because people want to find purpose from like a happy space and and that may happen for some people. But I mentioned in the first book that purpose is birthed from a place of pain, but how you manage that pain is what is going to lead you to clarity. And a lot of the times people will get more money, like people will have a great job, people will have all the fame, and they're still empty because they haven't gone to the person. People go to the universe, but why would you not do yourself true justice and go to the one who created the universe to help you manage and cultivate the gifts? Because he's the one that's going to bring to light all the things that has happened. And it's not going to be immediately, because we want instant gratification anyways, which doesn't make any sense, because God says in the word, if you are faithful with a few things, I will give you more. So sometimes in that moment, you have to go to God. And sometimes it cannot be any movement. It cannot be you launching anything. It cannot be you blasting any business. So at times it has to be you crying to God on the floor, being like, Lord, this hurts. Or crying in the shower and be like, God, I'm mad. Or I'm heartbroken. So I think in that moment to heal, you have to allow yourself to feel okay to be naked before God, because he sees it anyways. He's just waiting for you to say something, because we all want to be vulnerable to our friends. We all want to be vulnerable to our future spouse. But how can we when we can be vulnerable to the person who created us? Some people have intimate issues because they're not intimate with God. So it's like, that's why for me, I've learned like, I want a man that actually has a relationship with God, because it forces intimacy. So women try to do the most, I'm gonna put my lingerie on to make him more intimate. He's not gonna get emotionally intimate if he's not emotionally intimate to the one that created him. So another healthy way is doing that. And then another one, and I don't want to make this long-winded, but get to know yourself. Like, take yourself out. And I am the type of person, all my friends know this. If I'm like, I want to go to Brooklyn Museum, if it's first Saturdays, whether or not the people are going, I will still be there. Okay? I do not wait for anything. And I've always kind of been like that, because when you try new things, you know how you're excited and then you go, you're like, this is lit. And then you bring that one person who's like, I'm ready to go home. They will mess up the entire night. And if you're the one driving, you're just like, dang, and I got to bring you home. And it's different if the person had a car and the person in the car, you're like, all right, I'll just take an Uber home. But if you're the responsible driver, you're like, I can't have you take an Uber, right? So I think really taking time for yourself, because they'll get to a point where someone will meet you and they'll be like, wow, you've been single for how long? And women, we do this with men a lot. And it's like, that should never be a question. You should ask, what have you been doing during the time you've been single? Have you been like healing, traveling? Have you been going to the museum? Have you been trying new restaurants? Have you been trying to mend various broken relationships? That to me those are essential ways that I've definitely have been using, and I find it to be fruitful. And I don't care what, because people will say, girl, you've been talking about all these things, just where your man now, But you know what? I can at least say I'm content and I have joy. All right. You know what I mean? I can at least say like, I'm actually enjoying life. Like, I still get up in the morning and and mind you, I'm excited about something, right? It doesn't have to revolve around a person in this season, right? Because I speak things into existence, and I'm not like the Israelites who complained and their promised land took them way longer because of their mouth, which is another thing we have to be careful, because if we say there's no good people out there, you will not see no good people out there. I was an athlete in college. I ran, and one of the things I learned was every moment where I was like, oh yeah, I'm definitely gonna suck at this race, I sucked. I sucked. And that's when I realized, and I was running since like middle school. That's when I realized the power of the mind and the power of your words. We know biblically, and all these things we talk about, the power of the mind and the words, it all comes from the Bible. The Bible says life and death is in the power of your tongue. So if you're already speaking death to something that hasn't even happened, you haven't even allowed space for it to happen, why are you surprised when you don't have nobody? You said there was nobody good. So, and I'm not saying that if you say, there's, like I'm going to get married, like it's going to happen, because God doesn't promise marriage at all. There's nothing in the Bible that says that God promises marriage. Yes, he gives you the desires of your heart, but there's scripture prior to that requires you to spend more time with him to know to actually know the root of those desires. So I just think sometimes people just need to spend time by themselves and actually know your personality, know what you like, know what you don't like. What is your favorite food? What do you like to do for fun? And a lot of people can't answer that. Like, oh, like, you know, like, just what are your dreams or your vision? I don't know. So what have you been doing? Hopping from relationship to relationship, sleeping with this person, sleeping with that person, da 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 da. And they have no type of excitement unless there's a body next to them. And that, to me, is the most dangerous place for a single person to be in, because that means that your entire worth is weighted on someone that you don't even know if this is even something. This could. The thing is that we have to know the way the enemy works. He knows exactly what you like also. So there comes a point where you need to test every spirit. You need to be discerning. And I definitely was not discerning back in the day, which is how I'm able to like speak to him and say like, oh yeah, you meet a man, like, who's to say this man is single because he approaches you? I don't care what fitted suit he got on, what tie, what hat. It don't mean nothing. You will know them by their fruit. And so I think the more you spend time with yourself, the more you begin to care about you, who you are, that you will not let no thing, no one mishandle you. And even if it means you gotta be that like friend that's in the corner, just that isn't married, that isn't dating, that's fine. Because, and I have met men that have been single married men where it will make their wife look crazy. And I said, God, one thing, do not let my husband make me look crazy out here in these streets, because what do I look like posting something about, you know, my husband, like we're having dinner night and he's trying to create dinner night to other women in the DMs. So it's like,
that's a whole different conversation.
That's a whole, and mind you, and I'm not saying just for men, it's the same thing with women too. And it's a real thing, but I think that's when you mentioned something and it was like an ouch, but it's the truth. When you allow things to linger longer than they need to, it really is a reflection of you. Because I don't know anyone that really understands their worth that will literally sit there like, yeah, you know, like just we can date for like 6 years or whatever. No, 6 what? You mean 6 weeks? Or 6 days?
And to even add to that, right? I was thinking about it. So I went through one of my longest relationship. I want to share something that I think could probably help someone that is dealing with probably, I won't necessarily heartbreak, but I think sometimes we keep watering dead plants, right? And sometimes from a place of comfort, because the longer you invest in something, you want to see it blossom into something great. All right. And for me, I feel like I had put a lot of years. I had helped the person become better, and I see them grow in different areas. I'm like, man, I don't want to let that go. Not even necessarily because she was being who I wanted her to be or who I felt like my wife should be. But I feel like, man, I don't want to have another man reap all the harvest of what I planted. And what I had to learn to help myself not keep watering a dead plant is this, that we don't necessarily reap in the exact place that we sow, right? And when the scripture says that, you know, sow and you shall reap, it doesn't mean that it will come from the same place. That sometimes if as I sowed into her, somebody else is sowing into my wife that I haven't met, you know, and just it helps me let go of something that it's not good for me anymore. And instead of me trying to resuscitate a dead thing, I just let it stay dead. Like God told Samuel, I have rejected Saul. Stop asking for forgiveness for him. Go and anoint the next king. I have already chosen the next king. And sometimes I feel like we stay behind closed doors crying when God already opened up a new door. But because we are so obsessed with that closed door, we don't even have the clarity to see the new door that he already opened. So I think sometimes when we invest so much in a relationship, and I think also it goes back to, I think, inspecting before you invest is very, very important. And just realizing that you're not always going to, like, all right, you helped him start a business. You helped him become a better, you helped him become a fashionista. You helped him with this. You helped him with that. That doesn't necessarily mean, oh, another woman is going to come. I've heard people say, oh, another woman is just going to come and enjoy all the labor of my hands. But the person that you're going to meet, somebody else had to groom him. Somebody else had to help him become the man that when you meet him, he's going to be the man of your dreams. And it wasn't your work. So I think just going back to trusting God, that if this is not God's plan for me, I trust him enough to not try to force something that he has rejected and just go find something that he has already ordained for me. So I think just being willing to let go and now water dead plants is something that I think is challenging. It's easier said than done, because it's the longer you invest, like I said, the longer you invest, you naturally want to see it grow. So I think just being willing, and I also think this too, most people are afraid to start from scratch. But the truth is, you're not necessarily starting from scratch. You are starting from experience, right? So if I put 2 years into this and I have to start all over again, I'm not starting from scratch. I'm starting from all the lessons that I've gotten in the 2 years, and I can move to my next situation or my next relationship, and I can make better decisions. So I think the better question sometimes we should be asking is this: what did I learn? Not what L did I take? Because when we focus on what L we took, we are bitter. When we focus on the lesson that we took, we feel blessed. So I think that's something that could help us when we are healing through situationships and relationships. I think perspective is a big thing. How we are seeing things matters. All right, so just to wrap up, is there anything that we need to know about the book? Someone in the audience, someone listening, tell us something else from Heartbreak that you've realized that most people are not. They don't have. They always say this: when you hear people say 7 secrets to success, it's not necessarily because it is a secret. It is because you don't practice it. So whatever you don't practice is a secret to you, because you don't know how to practice it. Until you master it, it's still a secret to you. So what are some things that most people don't practice that you believe that if they practice it, they can overcome and heal faster and better?
So one thing about the book, this is not a book where you're like, okay, you're going to get somebody. I think I prefaced that. I'm like, this is not a book where you're like, I'm promising a man, I'm promising a woman for you. I am not God. But I think one of the things that came to my mind was be clear about what your non-negotiables are. That is your foundation with dating, with knowing when somebody comes into your life, the why. And for those who don't know what a non-negotiable is, it's like, you have your standards, and some people's standards are very floppy. It's not as strong, but your non-negotiable means that these are your core values. That means it doesn't matter how fine, how tall, how nice a teeth the person has. Like, if they do not have those core values, you are not even touching them. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think like an example, of course, would be like faith.
Give us your non-negotiables. What are some of your?
I don't say everything, because you know why?
You don't want them to pretend to be there.
And so, just
give us like 3. Just give us like 3.
So the reason why I don't is, and that's also a thing too. When people ask you like, oh yeah, like just what kind of person are you looking for? Mm-hmm. Don't say it. See if the person is what it is you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to remember, there are people that are good actors and actresses.
Great actresses.
They're great. Yeah. And then and this person can like fake the funk, and then it's on your wedding day, and then you're going home and you're like, wait a minute, I actually thought you said you like eating chicken. No, I'm a vegetarian. What? So I think it's like one of those things where it's like you have to just use wisdom. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we do a lot of oversharing of things like, oh yeah, like asking these blanket questions, which yes, getting answers is important, mm-hmm. but see how people move, right? Like see how this person's relationship is with their family, see how they interact with them. Someone who's like, yeah, like I hate all my family members, like they be tripping, that's a red flag. Everybody's tripping. Every single person in your family is tripping. There's no moments where you're like, maybe I'm the red flag, right? So I think definitely be clear of your non-negotiables. Do not share it. And one of the most important things is you know when you're ready to date, when you're okay with walking away with something that doesn't serve you. And if you know you're that person where you're like, oh, but they too fine, I don't know, then you're not ready to date. The goal is not to get a team. The goal is to have one person so that you can one day become a team. People want a roster where it's like, no. Your roster becomes with you and your husband, you and your wife, and you have your little kids, whatever the case is. But I think, and not even roster, as a team. I think you have to be okay with that. I think if you meet someone, you go out on dates, you're getting to know them, and you're like, this isn't it, and be okay with that.
All right, a couple of questions before we close out, just real quick. So is someone said, or you mentioned someone not being emotionally available. Is there a scenario where they are too emotionally available? Is that a thing?
I think maybe the person is just very emotionally, the person's emotional. Yeah, the person might be emotional, or the person is very tapped into their emotions and they are unapologetic about sharing it. I think it might be a personality thing, but I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I think it's layered, so explore it through therapy. You can do couples therapy.
Okay. All right. Another question. Real quick. What someone asked, what is it that you want people to get from your book? What is one thing or two things that you want someone that's reading the book? This is why I wrote the book. This is what I wanted you to get away from it. What is it?
Maximize your singleness from a place of wisdom.
Maximize your singleness from the place of wisdom. That's beautiful. Last question before we end. Someone said, where can they go to rate your book?
Oh, Amazon. You go to Amazon, and then if I pull your comments, I will post it on my Instagram page too.
Nice. Anyways, Joy, it's been a pleasure. You've been awesome today. You've been awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Relationship Essentials. Again, we'll have copies of her book. And like I said, I don't want her to go home with any copies. So it's $22. Make sure you grab a copy. Don't tell us you're buying it online. We know you're lying. Buy it here. $22. We have Cash App. We have Zelle. We have EBT. We have food stamp. Whatever it is that you need to pay with, we got you. All right. So please make sure you support her. And those of you that are watching online, please go on Amazon, buy the book, rate the book, post it on your Instagram. Some of us post nonsense on our Instagram. Post a good thing on your Instagram. Anyways, it's been a pleasure. Thank you guys for listening to Relationship Essentials. Please make sure you follow us on Instagram, follow us on YouTube, subscribe, share, repost, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Thank you so much.